final session of our Risk and Regulation Summit. I'm delighted to be involved in this one. It's a great chat. I've had a look at all these guys' presentations, and there's so much information that you're going to hear in the next hour that I think is just going to be so helpful. My name is Jordan Marshall. I'm Special Projects Editor at Building, and the topic for today's webinar is Building Safety Act Compliance, Tackling the Challenges of the Golden Thread. We have a really great panel for you. We have Robert Cridford, Technical Manager at Cineat, Simon King, Director at Robert Berg Group, Dr. Holly Liang, Fire and Life Safety Director at AESG, and we also have Anthony Langer, Managing Director at AHR, who will be with us momentarily. We're just having a slight tech issue on his end. Please send through your questions at any time. We'll try and answer off as many of those as we can in the Q&A portion of today. Also, if you want to access any of the presenters' presentations, they're all accessible via the resources button on the left-hand side of your screen. That's probably enough for me right now. Holly's going to kick things off for us. So Holly, I'll hand over to you.
Second. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Liang and the Director of Fire Life Safety. Thanks for the organizer, and it's a great pleasure to be here again. For those who are not in the summit last year and not familiar with AG, I just want to give you a quick introduction about the company. So AESG is a specialist consulting, engineering, and advisor firm with offices in London, Dubai, and Singapore. We are providing 6 core engineering services: fire and life safety, facade, MEP, commissioning, acoustic, energy, and sustainable design and environment, with projects across UK, Middle East, Europe, and Asia. Following the tragedy of Grenfell Tower, the significant number of changes have been made related to the building safety, in particular structure and fire. Building Safety Act has been introduced, which will replace the long-existing legislation, the Building Act 1984. And it also introduced a new system to oversee the performance of the building control functions, with local enforcement agency and national regulation working together to ensure the safety of all buildings is improved. So the government have created a new gateway system to ensure that building safety risks are considered at each stage of a building's planning, design, construction, and pre-occupation. Gateway 1 is at the planning stage. It came into effect on the 1st of August 2021. Gateway 2 occurs before construction stage. At Gateway 2, an application that includes the full design intention has to be provided to and approved by the regulator before construction work begins, providing a hard stop point until that approval is received. Gateway 2 is expected to be enforced October this year. Gateway 3, at the completion stage of the work, it is the completion final certificate phase, in which the duties will include handover of the relevant documents to both the regulator and the building owner. If approved, the regulator will issue a completion certificate, and a high-risk residential building will be registered on the regulatory system. A building cannot be occupied until a Gateway 3 process has been completed satisfactorily. All the 3 gateway systems are intended to create a golden thread of safety information about the building, ensuring that right information is available to the right people at the right time. So what to expect at each golden thread gateway? This is from a fire engineer point of view. Fire safety plays an important role for the integrated safety system throughout the whole project life cycle, from planning to post-occupation. At the Gateway 1 planning stage, issues related to fire safety is required to be considered at the earliest possible stage in the development process and result in a better scheme which fully integrates thinking on fire safety, and to ensure the proposed design would be feasibly achieve the compliance to fire safety regulations. The evidence is typically provided via a fire statement, containing complete and detailed information specific to that particular project, its risk and safety provisions. There are two types of fire safety statements. One is a fire statement conforming to the National Gateway requirements. It's applicable to those above 80-meter high-risk residential buildings in England. There's another one fire statement which is relating to the requirements of the London Plan 2021, and it's applicable to the projects within the Great London only. During the design stage, a fire strategy report is typically submitted to the approving authority or regulator in the future. The strategy report will provide information on how the design will comply with the functional requirements of the building regulations. It will also include the supporting evidence for the use of any fire engineering solution, such as saved simulations and detailed analysis. This will form part of the Gateway 2 submission. Fire engineering input in construction stage can be required in various areas. The key output would include construction fire strategies, construction phase risk assessment, site inspection to assess the construction site risk, as well as to review the linear compliance of the fire safety system installation. At the completion of the construction, a completion certificate will be issued as part of the Golden Thread Gateway 3 process, with evidence that the relevant documents are satisfactory and handed over to both the regulator and the building owner. Fire engineering input in post-occupation phase would include but not limited to the retrospect surveys, fire strategies, fire risk assessment, and fire safety management policies. In addition to the traditional input for fire engineering consultancy service at each project stage, the new Building Safety Act requires that the golden thread of building information to be created, stored, and updated throughout the building's life cycle. A building safety case is now required to be provided and submitted to the building safety regulator, which will require input from a fire engineer as part of the golden thread. So for the building safety case, for the existing buildings, you need to register the building first, and the building safety case can be submitted after the registration. For the new build, the requirement is to register the building before the Gateway 3 starts and before the completion certificate being applied. And then the building safety case needs to be submitted after your registration as well. So what information needs to be provided for the building safety case? There's secondary legislation, which is supposed to be details that information on the golden thread will be coming in force in the next couple of years. In the moment, it's not very clear on the details. However, HSE guidance has provided some basic information to be stored as part of the golden thread. The first one is building information. It includes when the building was built and the relevant standards such as building regulation in force at the time, the building's height, number of stories, detail of design construction, including external wall system and service, and utilize relevant to the building safety, information about any building work, such as refurbishment, relevant building safety that's taken place, history of the past fire, if there's any, and the number and the types of flats, the residence profile, for example, the approximate number of residents, and whether any residents needs extra assistance to evacuate in an emergency, the floor plan to show the interior layout, both as built and now. Second is identification of building risk and risk prevention and protection measures. So here we need to identify the control measures already in place, how any further actions identified has been will take forward, describe how the building safety risk can happen in the building, how things might go wrong in the building, type of frequency of fire risk assessment, and summarize the security findings of the risk assessment in terms of building safety risk. Structural integrity, what you are doing to identify the structural condition of the building and the maintenance, etc. So another one is a building safety management system reference and provide an overview of your safety management system under following headings, including role, responsibility of key persons, and functions related to building safety, ensuring that key personnel and any contractors used have the necessary competence, skill, knowledge, experience, and behavior. Performance monitoring, review, and reporting occurrence and complaints, mandatory occurrence reporting, how this has been communicated and arranged, and aligns with the other accountable person, the arrangement of reporting required occupants to building safety regulator, a summary of any reports in the period since the building safety case was last submitted. Note that the building safety case report is not a collection of individual reports compiled without narrative, reference, or context. It's not just a fire risk assessment. It's not a one-off exercise. It's not a standard document containing generic information or an overall technical or complex document. It's not a set of unsupported claims of safety without evidence. It's not a copy and paste from other building safety case. Individual buildings should have its own hazard and risk assessment. They are unique and need to be considered separately. As the Gateway 2 is closing in October, more and more awareness of the challenges are anticipating in the entire industry. There's a big gap between what the new law says and what can be achieved in short term. For example, unclear of the detailed information to stored, missing information for existing building, lack of industry-wide benchmark criteria, short of capacity. The new gateway system will create a higher demand for competent professionals on top of the current shortage of the resource, the backlog of lab fire testing, etc. Project contract program and fund. Since the Gateway 2 places a hard stop for contract work, the design and build contractor will not be suitable. Alternative is required, and what's the alternative is not clear at this stage. And the lack of funding, in particular, relating to the internal fire safety systems as well. Another challenge would be the wider selection of digital platforms, but unsure which one would be more appropriate until it's tested. So we're not stopping because of challenges. In fact, there are a number of actions we have started or can carry out now to prepare for the changes. Some examples are design and resource, early involvement in the project. MP this morning mentioned about in the BSR conference, early involvement, that actually means right at the start to involve the fire engineering. Enhance performance, improve fire safety awareness and competence of all involved, including owner, designer, contractor, asset manager, and occupier. Upscaling of all parties involved. Project lifecycle, involve clients and contractor at the beginning of the project, planning contracts and responsibility at the early stage. Good management system in place at the very beginning. Clarify ownership to store information for each project at each stage. Record all safety-related information digitally and centrally. There are a lot more to talk about the Building Safety Act and the Golden Thread gateways. So I will hand over to my colleagues to continue for the next topic. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much there, Holly. That was great. Simon, I might ask you to jump in next if that's okay.
Sure.
So if you, Holly, could you just stop sharing your screen so Simon could share his, please? Thank you. Excellent. And Simon, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thanks. Is my screen coming through?
Perfect.
Great. Hi, everyone. So the Golden Thread concerns two key areas, process and content. So let's start with these. The Golden Thread process concerns the management of information, and we're starting to get a glimpse of what this looks like. New standards have been issued that give us industry best guidance, such as ISO 19650, which presents structured storage and data exchange concepts within the building information modeling environment, and BS 8644, which concerns the digital management of fire safety information, including details of information exchange points, responsibilities of stakeholders, and the types of info to be saved. It is very likely that these documents are going to be at the heart of the Golden Thread. Essentially, the Golden Thread is an advanced electronic document management system, a more intelligent version of the systems we currently use to store and manage digital information. Now, these systems have evolved over the years, often in response to user feedback, to become the slicker versions we know today, but arguably they are still not perfect. So, one of the big challenges facing the Golden Thread will be in meeting the high expectations held by many stakeholders from day one. No easy feat when billed as the single source of truth that is simple, secure, accurate, accessible, and adequately durable or future-proofed for generations to come. Getting this right from the outset is probably the biggest challenge. The next big challenge is the content, and that goes into the Golden Thread. We know it'll contain structural and fire safety information for the building, but exactly to what level of detail? Holly's presentation covered the input and output at each gateway and throughout the life cycle from a fire safety perspective. It is good to see that guidance such as BS 8644 gives us details on the likely fire safety content, but more guidance is required to map out structural safety at each gateway. For example, at Gateway 1, which is at planning stage, will it be appropriate to only provide a high-level statement of the structural stability and robustness strategies for the building, or will there be a requirement for calculations? Is a structural BIM model required? Similarly, at Gateway 2, prior to construction, when we need to demonstrate how proposals comply with building regulations, the challenge will be in fully understanding exactly the level of calculations and analysis output, including drawings and details that are required to satisfy building safety regulators. Clarifying the required information, say through the use of examples and case studies, will greatly help all users of the Golden Thread. Workflow. How will the Golden Thread affect the day-to-day working and approach to delivering our design? Again, taking a designer's view, there will undoubtedly be more design workshops during REBA Stage 1 and 2, where the fire consultant takes center stage to develop, with the rest of the design team, a holistic fire strategy with particular relevance to staircases, lifts, lobbies, materials, and products. Dedicated workshops tabling Golden Thread activities and processes will also become the norm in the build-up to Golden Thread submissions. Hopefully, the actual facilitation of the Golden Thread will be no different to that of the role played today by a document controller as they collate and publish information. Due to its iterative nature, the design process, and therefore the Golden Thread, must consider change. Having to address change needs to be factored into the information management system described earlier. Updating information must be made simple, generating clear and definitive outcomes. When dealing with very large amounts of information, all subject to change, the challenge will be in providing a suitably agile system which considers the who, what, when, where, why, and how. This agility will be tested as greater levels of detail, particularly during the latter design stages, construction stage, and occupancy stage, comes into play. Program. And this speaks for itself. Adequate time must be allowed to assimilate, review, and record building safety information before being submitted at each of the gateways. As is often the case, activities that are rushed will inevitably lead to errors. Errors or incomplete information will lead to non-conformances from building safety regulators, which in turn will only lead to risk of delays in the design, construction, or handover process. It is imperative that programs showing suitable design, construction, and handover milestones are planned in advance and agreed by all stakeholders. Quality assurance. All design and construction information needs to be checked and approved. This will be no different when it comes to the Golden Thread. Having the right people assigned to the QA at the right time will be important. Training. Not so long ago, we witnessed one of the biggest challenges seen in the industry with the relatively slow uptake in BIM. Much of this was attributed to the lack of widespread expertise and awareness. Forums, task groups, and events, such as the one we are attending today, together with the increased exposure of the golden thread in industry publications, is certainly a step in the right direction, but more is needed. With the golden thread, as with any other new procedure or process, structured training must be offered at an early stage, and if required, regularly topped up so that it becomes a natural process. Guidance notes giving a good practice approach are expected to follow the secondary legislation that is currently being prepared and should be in place for transition to the main regime in October of this year. Structural engineers working on higher risk buildings will need to demonstrate technical and behavioral competencies. Training in these areas has already been identified by bodies such as the Institution of Structural Engineers. Lastly, it will be interesting to see if formal recognized training becomes a requisite of relevant accreditation processes. And lastly, cost. Introducing new activities into any process comes at a cost. Part of this additional cost will be directed at the actual implementation of the golden thread activities by various members of the team, such as in attending workshops, preparing information, and so on. But secondary costs will also be borne. And if we were to learn from the integration of BIM into the industry, these will include things such as training, accreditation, software licenses, and possibly upgrades to computer hardware. As with any business function, these need to be considered carefully, appropriately, and allowed for in fee proposals, aligned with scopes and appointments. So that concludes my presentation, and I can stop sharing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think we do have Anthony, but I think he's had to dial in via phone because of some tech issues. Anthony, are you there?
I am here, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, glad we have you. If you wouldn't mind going next, I'll share your slides for you. So if you just let me know what you want when, I can do that.
Okay, all right, let's go for it.
Thank you for joining.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Tony Langan from AHR Architects in Manchester. I don't know what everybody else has said because I've only just dialed in, so I'll run through my presentation. As no doubt you're aware, the Building Safety Act came in about a year ago, and we're now in the transition period to October 2023, when the establishment of the Building Safety Regulator will take place, and Gateways 2 and 3 will come into force. And the Gateways 2 and 3 are the key assessment of the golden thread, particularly for designers. As I did catch at the end of the previous speech, that at the moment we're going through a period of secondary legislation running through, and particularly for professionals, there's a series of competencies which are being enacted through that. For the architects, I'm an architect. For the architects, it's for the ARB, and there are similar sort of guidance for each of the various professions. So if we move on to the first slide about the golden thread principles, it's pretty simple, really. It's a single source of digital information. I guess you've heard quite a bit of this before. It needs to be simple to access. It needs to be secure. It needs to be accountable. We'll talk about the client's input into this later, but one of the key elements of that, it needs to be relevant and proportionate, and also it needs to be a maintained source of information for the life of the building. If we move on to the next slide now, which should say golden thread information purpose. So as I've already said, it's a clear identification of fire safety hazards from the early start of the design process, and for that to be recorded, setting out clear trigger events, understanding the technical information that's shared by all of the parties. And again, people have been into the detail of that during the previous speeches, so I won't go on too much about that. And then the appropriate dissemination of that knowledge. And well, the key aspect of this is the clear allocation of the responsibility for fire safety through the assets life cycle, and that's through a number of key duty holders through the process of inception through design, construction, and then through the assets management, and then on to its demolition eventually when the building comes to the end of its life. So we move on to the next slide, and this should say golden thread scope, and you see with the diagram there's quite an easy diagram to understand this, and it goes from the briefing stages, very early stages of the design process, all the way through the life of the building or asset as it's known, and to its demolition. And you can see here we've set out the key stages of information exchange. The initial one being the briefing and the information exchange from the client and the setting out of the client safety objectives. This is a key part of the golden thread because this sets the standards by which the building will be managed in the future. I'm sure you're probably well aware that it's only life safety is actually regulated by statutes. All the other aspects of the golden thread and the scope of the golden thread need to be outlined by the client and need to be reasonable and proportionate for the type of building, and that will take on board things like simple things like the contents, its value, whether the building itself is an heritage asset. That particularly is very significant. If the building does come into difficulties with a fire, then the aspects of pollution and so on and so forth. So there's quite a lot of information that runs into that, and I'll talk about that briefly in a few minutes. And then you move on to the outline design, and then so that's sort of stages 2 and 3, or IBA stages. During that stage, we've inserted, because we've done quite a lot of work on preparing for this system, we've set out our own processes internally where we respond to that briefing by the clients. Planning Gateway 1 is reasonably simple. We've done a couple of these now where it's essentially information which goes alongside the planning application, which sets out the general scope of the building and the aims. As you move through develop design, working drawings and the like, and potentially through tender action towards Gateway 2. Gateway 2 is very important because that's a stop event. Essentially, if you don't get approval to essentially a full building regulations approval at Gateway 2, then you can't start on site effectively. That's what the regulations say. So there's quite a lot of discussion going on in the industry at the moment about how that will work, particularly for two-stage design and build or projects which have enabling contracts within it. And then through the design process, we need to, the fire risk starts from the construction of the building. So inevitably we have to be able to set out within the golden thread information which will be effective from that point. And there will be information exchange G, which is set down there, which is information which is sent to the fire and rescue service, and that will again change throughout the life of the construction and then the asset in use. But inevitably, if the building gets into trouble with fire during the construction period, then the fire authorities need to know how to tackle the fire in particular circumstances. And then when the construction completes and you get towards the handover period, you have a Planning Gateway 3, and again that's another stop event prior to occupation of the building. And then if you move on, you move then into the stages of asset handover, and then into FM records where the duty holder changes and the building is managed throughout its life, with the assets being updated throughout redevelopments of the building, and then essentially information is retained for when the building is eventually demolished. So if we can move on to the next slide. the next slide, these will be issued. It just sets out some of the key information, which runs through information exchanges at the various gateways. So I won't talk about that in detail really because time is short. So we'll move on to the next slide. So the key aspects of I talked about earlier on was for the client to set out the safety objectives for the building, and this revolves around their priorities. As I said, life safety is covered by legislation, but beyond that, there are a number of different aspects to the safety objectives of the building, and these need to be set upon reasonable measures. Move on to the next slide, and that will then involve things like, as I said before, contents, the contents of the building, business interruption, a very important thing in terms of how the building will respond to that, and how the fire safety plan will respond to that. And then similarly, things like if the building is a cultural asset, then if it's grade 1 listed, then there's only certain types of interventions that can be put in place, but equally it needs to be protected for wider societal reasons. And then finally, as I said, environmental aspects and the exposure and risk of pollution and mitigation measures which need to be put in place in the case of a fire to prevent pollution. And then if we move on to the client safety objectives, again, this is just a list of the information which needs to go through the various stages of the exchange, information exchange. And then finally, we move on to the key role during the design and construction stage of the principal designer, and this is the key duty holder. And the top line really is the key aspect of this, which is for the principal designer to be able to plan, manage, monitor all of the design work, ensuring coordination of the design through all the consultants, to ensure that if the building was built, it would actually comply. And that's quite a onerous role when you look at it. So that's one for the future. Okay, so that's I think that's the end of my slideshow. So thank you very much for listening in. Sorry, I'm a little bit distant. I'm on a mobile phone.
No, that was perfect. Thank you. That was really insightful. And I got firsthand to have read through those slides while they were going, so that was very nice. We'll come back to you definitely during the Q&A, Anthony, so please hang on the line for us. But we have one presentation from Robert. If Robert, you would like to share your slides, we'd love to hear from you now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just get those up now. Okay, is that coming through okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant. Okay, so Robert Cridford, I'm Technical Manager at Siniat. So we are a drywall plasterboard supplier. One of our sister brands is Promat. We're under the Etex group. So what I'm going to present is a bit of a manufacturer's view on the golden thread. So we've had the previous presenters who are part of the design teams, part of the consultants involved. They're talking about the process and the submissions that need to be made, the gateways. I think from a manufacturer's point of view, we're a step away from that. We're supplying into the golden thread. We're supplying to those people and to those teams. I think the way that's summarized it best was in one of the consultation documents, was that the golden thread has got to be full of information, and a lot of that information will be coming from the manufacturers indirectly. So it's got to be information that you can trust, it's got to be accurate, it's got to be up to date, and it's got to be accessible and shareable. So I think there's just sort of a bit of something that I think a manufacturer you need to bear in mind when you're trying to prepare for the golden thread. So what do we know today? Well, we've got some of the key headlines. We've got some of we know there's going to be gateways. We know it needs to be certain aspects of it, but there's a lot of detail still to come in the secondary legislation. But what we do know is it has to be delivered digitally. It shouldn't need, the consultations all say that we shouldn't be looking for elaborate software to solve this problem. It can be relatively simple. It's more about a process.
Yeah.
So that a manufacturer needs to be ready to work with the processes that are put together. We need to be focused on building safety. So when we're supplying information here, it's not about paint color, it's about the critical fire and structural safety elements. It's likely to be, the golden thread is likely to become the method by which building control approval is sorted. It becomes the submission. So it's not an afterthought. This is absolutely, from the beginning, needs to be a package of information which is built until it's submitted in the various stages and then updated. We're aiming to build confidence through the golden thread. We should be ending up in a situation where everybody involved is confident that all the information is there and that everything's been done properly. So we've got to avoid grey areas, we've got to avoid any confusion. We need to provide traceability. So that safety information has got to be in there, but it can't just be fragmented. It has to be connected to the building and to its parts of the building that it relates to. And it's got to be kept at key times and kept up to date. And I think to keep it up to date, the whole building design, the construction team, the design team, the supply teams have got to work together to make sure that all that information is continuously updated. Or maybe not continuously, updated at the right times, because otherwise it could become a little bit messy. So that's a bit of an overview of some of the key features that I think we need to be aware of as a manufacturer, but then what can you do to prepare? So I've taken through this, I'm taking the examples of work that we've done, actions we've put in place, or things we already had that we think will set us up nicely to be able to support projects with the golden thread. So I think an absolutely key part of this will be to renew and expand the test evidence available. So I think golden thread was triggered by a fire safety tragedy. So fire safety would be absolutely critical. I think every manufacturer has got to look at how much risk is associated with their product range. We produce drywall systems, which actually, when you look at the sheer volume of material in a building which is providing a fire-resisting purpose, we must be one of the biggest ones out there. So there's a huge risk, or a notional risk, associated with our products, not that they are risky in themselves. So we need to be providing a full range, a depth and breadth of range of fire evidence. That's something we've been investing in over the last few years. And really critical, we think, is to follow the absolute latest standards, avoid the grey areas. And one of the ways to do that is the latest sort of version of Approved Document B is talking about using third parties to assess all this information, following EN standards, and the kind of the gold standard, well, not even the gold standard. The right way to do that is through a classification report, a relatively simple summary of the fire evidence and what it relates to. That'd be produced by a third party following a standard. And you've got to start from a test. It then needs to be extended, which got to be done by a third party into an EN standard, then extended again by a third party following the approved standard, saying you can make this change, you can extend here. And then it needs to be put together into a classification report. And so I think if a manufacturer is doing those elements, then you're going to end up with a position where you can eliminate a lot of the grey areas, and the content and evidence that is going into the golden thread is going to be of a high quality, it's going to be safe, and it's going to be accurate, trusted, up to date. And I think manufacturers need to help tie the information together. So you've got a project, it needs to be documented, and it needs to be associated with the fire evidence, the classification reports. So the way we tackle this is to effectively produce our own golden thread internally, which can then be supplied to the project. So we have one master document, one master file per project. All the elements that involve our products and systems are identified. all the evidence is tied together, so it can be automatically compiled and supplied when needed. Every element has a piece of safety guidance of how to install it, how to make sure that you will achieve that performance, and it can be kept updated. So we have a team working with with design and build teams in order to make sure that that's up to date. That's the way we do it, but something similar is going to be applicable for many other manufacturers. I think all manufacturers will need to increase the digital delivery of this information. It needs to be easily accessible so that the teams putting together the Golden Thread package can pull this information when they need it. They can know what they're getting. They can find their project information. So that pack that I just spoke about, we produce for each project. Our intention is very soon is to be able to make that available for direct access by our customers. I think another thing that we need to do is commit to working with projects on their data needs. What interoperable formats will they end up needing? It's not clear yet. It's unlikely to be set out in the actual official rules. It's going to be an evolving set of standards that we comply with.
Live streaming is on.
We're also looking. I think every manufacturer needs to be investing in their competency. Expand your technical support, specification management teams, so that the support is there when needed, so that the information that the projects are demanding can be supplied quickly and efficiently and correctly, and by competent people. So increasing the training and qualifications, I think, will be important. As an example for us, we've had 24 of our technical and specification teams have now gone through a fire engineering level 3 qualification, passive fire protection. So we know that we've raised that base level of competency across our team. We've got others within the team with higher levels as well. And I think key will be to listen and collaborate. We're the Golden Thread is an evolving, the whole Building Safety Act is an evolving situation. There isn't a clear, you must do A, B, and C in order to comply in terms of the detail of the Golden Thread. So we need all the project teams collaborating and helping each other get it right, particularly as a manufacturer, being one step back. We're looking for guidance from the project teams as to what we need to supply, how we can best do that. So if we go back to that original quote, I think if we take some of those steps, we can get to a point where the content going into the Golden Thread is trustworthy, is accurate, is up to date, and is easy to access and share and meet the regulations. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was another great presentation. I'm going to jump straight into the Q&A because things are running very quickly. There's been so much information for everyone to get through, and we've had so many questions come in. Holly, would you be able to pop your camera back on for us? Well, thank you. And Anthony, you're still there? We might have lost Anthony.
I'm still here.
Oh, perfect. That's wonderful. Excellent. I will obviously come to you directly, Anthony, but feel free to jump in if I've missed you off answering something you want to jump in on.
No problem.
So I'm going to get into our audience questions because we've had so many coming in. I want to answer off as many of them as possible. So we've had one come in asking, how does the building safety case differ from the existing requirement under Regulation 38 for fire safety information? Are there any key differences people need to be across? Is there anyone who can speak to that? That's okay. We can just, if it's one that people need to have a think about, that's all right. We can move on to the next.
I do a very brief comment on that. It's not an area I've got much expertise on, but I think in the proposal in one of the consultations was that Regulation 38 would drop out of being required and be replaced by a Golden Thread. So I think in many ways they're similar, but the Golden Thread will supersede Regulation 38 for HRRB, high-rise residential buildings.
Brilliant. We've had another one. Thank you for that. That's a great help there. We've had this one come in saying, given that we haven't seen the final draft regulations, is an October start date really practical or feasible? Or should there be a transitional phase of more than 6 months? And if so, for how long? Is that fairer to the industry? Does anyone have any views on that one? I feel like, Simon, you might have something to say there. Your face was saying something anyway.
I think there's a lot to be done. Speaking to people within the industry, we're only sort of nearly 12 months after Royal Assent. So the secondary legislation should be sort of coming to an end next month. But with the sort of October milestone, there's still a lot to be done, and that's the way. What I'm talking about is guidance, to the industry on how to go about their work. So I think my personal take on it is October is a big ask. Sort of affecting big changes such as the new Building Safety Act. We should allow the right amount of time to have it well planned, well organized, and rolled out to a satisfactory level. So it'd be great to see something matured and issued out to the industry over the next number of months, and certainly it could be sort of a soft start to October, but I wouldn't be surprised if we sort of move into the next year and to see it formally and properly rolled out.
Brilliant. Did anybody else want to come in there? Anthony, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we're in contact with the RIBA quite a lot on these. I was on a forum with them just the other day, and they're ironing out the competencies for architects, which have been coming for some time, I have to say, but nonetheless, they didn't seem to be in any state of completeness. And my understanding of it, depending on the you talk to, the gateways 2 and 3, when they do come in, are quite strict. They come down. The aim is that the guillotine comes down pretty quickly. So if that is the case, then it could be quite troublesome. So I suspect an October date for gateways 2 and 3, and having the all of the people required to sort of verify this in the building safety regulator. Getting all those people on board, I understand, is proving to be quite difficult. I would agree that probably October is probably ambitious, but nonetheless, I think we need to be aware that is the date that the government has still got in the mind. If you go to, there is a chart, I'd show it you if I had, if it was online. There's a chart on the government website which shows the timelines, and they haven't changed it. I checked the other day.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. Did Robert, Holly, did either of you want to come in there, or do you think that sort of covered that one off?
No, that's fine. I was trying to mute a little bit because my background noise. I'm sorry about that. Actually, I'm in the Building Safety Regulation Conference at the moment. So the Gateway 2 will kick off in October. That is for sure. That's already in the pipeline. And there are lots of things we can start to prepare. I know it's quite urgent, but for the existing buildings, they ask for high-risk building to be registered from April to October, so they've got 6 months' time. It doesn't necessarily mean they will have the building safety case report before the registration. They just need to register, and then they can start to collect all the reports. So they still have time. The earlier they collect the information, the better you miss the information as well. For the new design, that will be probably easier. You start the collection at the first start of the project, and then your the registration will be done before your pre-occupations.
Brilliant. Thank you. If you perfect. I was going to say, if you wouldn't mind chucking it back on mute just while you're not speaking, that'd be great. Robert, did you have anything else you wanted to add there, or do you think the others have covered it?
I think that's fairly well covered. It's certainly a challenge. I think it's going to depend on the attitude of the regulator. I mean, I think when you haven't got guidance to work to, I think there's going to be a whole lot of projects submitting a huge range of different things into Gateway 2. Well, we'll see if they can cope with that.
Okay, we'll move on to the next one. And so the next one we have here is, do we actually know exactly what information is going to be required for the documents? Do we know how that's going to have to be submitted? Because is it going to be working differently for different people? And I suppose that's what you've just touched on there, Robert. Essentially, they're going to get a whole lot of people submitting a whole lot of different stuff. Is there any way that there's a really good guide that people can use to follow?
And not that I'm aware of.
I think knows the answer to that one.
No, that's fine. That's
I
sorry.
think that's what we're all waiting for.
Yeah, shall I talk a little bit about that? So there's no detailed guidance yet, but there's a building safety regulator. They started to collect some information. So at each stage, what they are expecting as well. There's a document. If you go to the building safety regulator website, you'll be able to find that.
Bro, thank you. That's a good piece of advice for people.
Yeah, so something like you need to collect the building information and then statement in the planning stage, and then the compliance report. You need to demonstrate the safety compliance report. During the construction, if there's any change, you are expected to have the change control documents.
Brilliant, thank you. That kind of leads to another question. Well, we've got so many coming in. I'm just trying to pick a few that have been asked a few times, essentially, as they seem to be the most popular ones. There's been quite a few questions coming about product substitution and how that's going to work. So, for example, if a product for use in the facade was approved at Gateway 1, but then is not available when construction starts, how can alternative products be approved? Do we have any clarity on that, or is there any process at all around product substitution and how that could work?
And whether there's a change process within the I'm not sure which part you call it within the Gateway process. If you're making a change which is minor, you're allowed to proceed as once you've notified the regulator. If you're making a major change, you have to wait for permission to make that change. So I think you're going to have to be supplying evidence that product is equal to what has been approved and what has already gone into the submission. I think we've seen over the recent years that substitution can be a problem. So I think that's probably the right thing to do. But it will present its own challenges.
Brilliant. Does anyone else want to come in there, or does that one cover that off? On a similar but related note, we have a question about feedback loops. So where a project gets comments requiring change at Gateway 2, and then sort of what the process is, does it get kicked all the way back to Gateway 1 and you have to start over again? Or do you make those changes and then proceed through Gateway 2? And is it just going to be a loop for some schemes? Does anyone know? Or is it still a bit unclear how that'll work?
I would imagine it'll be much like a sort of building regulation submission where you may have to do some amendments in order to improve the design. I would suspect, but depending upon the consultant team that you have on board, then obviously you would hope that you wouldn't get to that point. I mean, as I said when I was rambling through my slides, the key issue with those gateways is they are stop-go gateways, as I understand it, and so moving to site is predicated on you having a formal approval. So there's none of this. Put your submission in and then we'll start on site and hope for the best. So I would imagine that, again, there isn't any guidance out there as I'm aware, but it would have to be a substantive approval.
Brilliant. No, I think that really helps provide some guidance. So we've had another one come in. We've had quite a few come in about the idea that obviously the golden thread information is required to be stored digitally. And do we have any guidance on what format that needs to take, and compatibility between people in the supply chain and that sort of thing? Is it going to involve investment in new systems for a lot of firms, do you think?
I think I alluded to. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the question.
Oh, sorry. Essentially, it's like what format do you expect the digitally stored golden thread to take, and will it involve investment in new systems for a lot of firms?
Well, I think one of the criteria needs to be easily accessible. So, I think whatever platform technologically wise it's on, then it needs to be able to be read by essentially lay people. So it does need to be accessible. So I'm not sure that it would probably take a lot of conversion of information, but as I say, it does need to be accessible and easy to maintain as well. If it costs a fortune to maintain it, then obviously that's a blocker in the information chain being maintained.
Absolutely.
I think my first slide in the deck sort of alluded to the possible format for the golden thread. So I'd suggest attendees would look at ISO 19650 or British Standard 8644. They certainly are the sort of leading edge of information management systems. And certainly there's been a lot of good work in that. And as my slide suggested, it's very likely that will be at the heart of the golden thread going forward. There's a lot of there's a lot of information there. And I think one of a further challenge is those that undertake for example, the design or construction will need to expand on their capabilities and skills and knowledge to allow them to understand what these systems mean and how they operate. Normally the content of these documents are usually understood by people who work in the BIM environment day to day, and senior technicians who work in the BIM environment, less so of the engineers. But certainly it's something which we need to address going forward. We need to certainly have training in those areas to understand the format, what it means, and that training can take the form of many different types: basic, intermediate, and expert. And no doubt there'll be some form of training guidance rolled out over the next number of months.
Brilliant. We're very quickly approaching the end of the session here. So I just wanted to ask, because we've covered a lot of ground for everybody. So I was sort of hoping that I could ask each of you to give us one, maybe two tips for people to get prepared to start getting this, getting their shop in order, I guess, for a better way, for want of a better word. Like, what should people be doing now so that they're, ready to hit the ground running? Does anyone particularly want to go first?
I mean, I'll just continue, just to follow on from what I just said, if that's okay, Jordan. Yeah, just start speaking to your technologists that operate within your companies, those people that are au fait with the BIM environment and information management systems. They're going to be key to the success in the implementation of the golden thread going forward. And I think just as a general awareness, start taking an interest in this, because it's not going to go away. It's mandatory, which means that when you read or come across something in a publication or on the internet, take time to read it and understand it. And if you don't, start asking questions. So I think that's the two bits that I would propose people start doing now.
Brilliant, thank you. Anthony, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, I guess from an architect's point of view, there's been a lot going on around this. So I would engage with professional bodies, We've been internally looking at how we prove our competencies. There's a framework for that within the RIBA CPD. So I would ask everybody to engage with that. It revolves around skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours. And one of the key aspects of this is about behaviours and predicating those across the whole of the design team. Also, again, I think designers within the design reviews that they're undertaking now should start to prepare for this. We have internally, so we record design decisions fastidiously anyway, but particularly with regard to fire safety now, with this in mind. So in our design reviews, we have those audited with this in mind, in order to build the case when it comes around to the various gateways. So I think there are things you can be doing now to put your house in order, because you never quite know how quickly the guillotine will come down in October or beyond.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anthony. Robert, did you have a couple of points for us there?
Yeah, I think keep your eyes open for the formal the formal guidance and standards when that comes out. It can't be that far away if this is need to be submitted in October. And I think the other one is please talk to the manufacturers. Please help the manufacturers understand what they need to do to support this. I think collaboration is going to be a key to getting this right. Working together to try and make it easy rather than difficult.
Brilliant. And last but not least, Holly, do you have just a couple of points for us there?
Yeah, it's actually part of my last slides when say what we can prepare. I think it's upscaling, so everyone needs to prepare for the competence. There's guidance about what competence for each party is involved. So everyone look at the benchmark and say the competence upscale yourself, and then fully understanding the process of approval. I think the approval process is changing, and you may need to think about the time scale of the projects. Now the Gateway 1, they are talking about 21 days turnover. So that means the first submission of your application is 21 days, but if you resubmit or have a query, that's a second submission, so they will expect another 21 days. And Gateway 2 and 3 is expecting about a 12-week turnover. So all of those has to be taken into account, understand the entire process fully, particularly with those projects that are in transition. They are probably expecting to do building control approval now, and then October time, they will hit the target. That's transition. They need to speak to the approval authority as soon as possible to understand what's the process for them.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'd just love to say a huge thank you to all our speakers. Thank you for being so generous with your expertise and your time. So I know I've stolen a few extra minutes at this end of the session. Thank you to our audience for all your questions. Apologies to anybody whose question we didn't get to. Please don't forget you can download all the presentations. They're accessible via the resources button on the left-hand side of your screen, so you can revisit all the information that's been shared. And the session will be available on demand in about an hour's time, so please share it with anybody. Finally, I'd just love to say a huge thank you to Cineart for making today possible. And then also, please also check out the session that we had this morning. That's available on demand as well. That's it for me. So a huge thank you.
Thank you.